Welcome back to another episode of Uncut and Unfiltered. We are here today behind the scenes at the Whisky Event in London. Everything's being set up. We found ourselves a quiet room. I'm joined by my good friend Posh Scotch. Ian, how are you, sir?
Hello.
You ready for today?
Looking forward to it like nothing else. I've been here a couple of times
Buzzing
before.
for this one.
Buzzing.
It's going to be good. And I cannot wait for the setup for this because we are joined by the very famous Colin Dunn, and we're going to be doing top shelf tipples with Colin Dunn. Colin, welcome to Uncut and Unfiltered.
Fantastic. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And you have bought some seriously cool drams. I said, would you be up for spending a little bit of time in the afternoon, maybe bring a couple of whiskeys? And you said, well, what about these? And I went, oh, Christ. Okay, I think we can do that. You've got quite the lineup here.
In the mix, right there.
100%, 100%. I brought my own little contribution, but let's get going. You've got some stories to tell.
Yes.
You've got some seriously great whiskeys to share. You are all very much in for a treat. Not quite as much as Ian and myself, who get to experience it firsthand, but hopefully we'll be able to share some great stories and at least tell you what these tasty tipples taste like.
Fantastic.
So you wanted to start with the Bruichladdich?
Yeah, I'm going to start actually for all the listeners and these two gentlemen next to me with a little sermon. Today's Sunday.
It is.
And one of my favourite, please go ahead and pour, one of my favourite people is a guy called Primo Levi. And he wrote this incredible book called Is This a Man? Now, some of you may or may not be familiar with him, and I'll leave it for you to find out at your leisure. Levi spelt as in Levi. The man survived the concentration camps. He became a chemist, and he wrote a few lines back in the 1940s about alcohol, about distillation. And when I first read it a few years ago, I wrote it down. I thought it was that good. So I'm going to give you around about 40 seconds of a man both of you have never heard of.
Okay.
Called Primo Levi. We okay with that?
Definitely.
You got your dram?
Please, crack away,
Okay.
yes.
Distilling is beautiful. First of all, because it is a slow, philosophic and silent occupation, which keeps you busy, but gives you time to think about other things, like a little like riding a bike. Then, because it involves a metamorphosis from liquid to vapor, invisible, and from this once again to liquid, and in this double journey up and down, purity is obtained. An ambiguous and fascinating condition which starts with chemistry and goes very, very far. And finally, when you set about distilling, you acquire the consciousness of repeating a ritual consecrated by the centuries, almost a religious act in which from imperfect material you obtain the essence, the ushki, the spirit. And in the first place, alcohol, which gladdens the spirit and warms the heart. Page 62 of the periodic table by Primo Levi. Check it out. It's worth it.
I love that. That's a great little way to start. Thank you so much for that, Colin. And it's so right. I mean, there is something that is so kind of religious. Oh,
Sorry.
bit of the sacrament for you there today, sir, on Sunday.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, there is something kind of religious and spiritual, and it's such an incredible industry that we work in, you know, and I think, you know, I have to pinch myself just listening to you now, but you know, the whole practice of making whiskey, there is something about it like that. When was that written, sorry?
Around about 1945, 1950.
I love that. And nothing's
Primo
really
Levi.
changed from that point of view, right? That feeling, that essence,
Right there.
that truth is still there,
Right
100%.
There's a lot out there. If you go back, I love doing evenings of whiskey and literature. That's just one example. I mean, my favorite was I did a gig one time at the Globe, Shakespeare's old haunt, on Bankside. And I thought, well, if I'm doing a whiskey tasting for 300 people in the globe in the round, I've got to do a bit of Shakespeare.
Definitely.
And I found within Shakespeare a piece that I could use. And I did it. I did Shakespeare in the globe.
Love
and
it.
it went, and it was just like 2 or 3 lines, but it was, and this is Shakespeare's words: alcohol provoketh the mind, but taketh away the performance. And I added to that like a cherry, like an illustration to a book by saying, but that was before we had the Lagavulin 16. That was my opening line in the globe.
I was just about to say you're so much more than a brand ambassador, but then you're right back in it as well. I love it. I love it. That's great.
You know, so, and with this, what you've got here is a distillery that's close to my heart.
Bruichladdich, right?
I went to the opening day
Okay.
in the year 2001. 23 years ago. Michael Jackson was with the directors in a plane that was doing a loop-de-loop.
Oh, cool.
And Jim McEwen was there with the old boys to cut the ribbon, to get the new spirit. And having the old boys there was like passing the baton on to the next generation. You know, 8 o'clock in the morning, 400 or 500 of us there.
Yeah.
It was a buzz. It's a buzz. You know, no caviar and fancy drinks, just good old-fashioned atmospheric spirit or feeling at Bruichladdich. And from then, you obviously had to wait years and years and years. The best casks had been taken out by the previous owners, so to speak. So a lot of it was blending whiskey, fill the stills high, get them into barrels, good night Irene kind of scenario.
Yeah,
For
you
sure.
know?
For sure.
Which happens a lot. And but they managed to get by taking on a wine influence. Mark Rainier, who's now moved to Waterford, I think, he started bringing in some classy casks, Grand Cru Classé, the top from the 1855 classification of Bordeaux, Lafite, Latour, Mouton, Haut-Briand, and the one and only, the greatest dessert or sweet wine in the world, Chateau Yquem. You ever tried it?
Only whiskey finishes, sadly.
You tried it?
I have.
You
yeah.
know what I'm
Been
talking
lucky
about.
enough to try
If you're
it.
in the right people
Yeah.
at the right place, you think of the great sweet wines like Tokaj, Essentia, Chateau Yquem, Montbazillac, Barzac. Yquem is ethereal.
Yeah.
And he brought all these casks in. And in a way, it was a precursor because then a lot of companies, Glenmorangie started bringing in Margaux cask and Cote Roti cask, etc. And all of a sudden, from the 1950s and 1960s, when nobody really gave a shit about what cask it was in, Michael Jackson once infamously said to me, the thing is with Talisker, Colin, it's either brilliant or crap. It's like the weather. And that's because there was no real control over what kind of barrels. In fact, back then, it was mainly port casks.
Really?
Hence, Talisker released Talisker Porterie.
Yeah.
That's the homage, if you will. That fruity, savoury note. If you taste Talisker, digressing for a second through Gordon MacPhail, that's another baby altogether. It's a lot of what was the sweetener used back in the day? Do you remember?
Oh,
was that?
Paxaret.
Bam, that so much of it. It's a bit like lavender in whiskey. In small amounts, great, but in large amounts, not that great. You remember the FWP story?
No?
Yeah, Bemore, the
Right?
French lady's perfume.
There you go. French whore's perfume.
Sorry.
Because there was just too much of it. So getting back to it, Bruichladdich started bringing out lots and lots of different editions, and they also allowed the general public to buy a cask. And this particular gentleman down in Cornwall, he bought 2 casks, but he specifically asked, could he have them in Chateau Yquem? Sauternes, rich, viscous, mouth-filling flavour, if you will. Well, last year he bottled them. One was a 16-year-old and the other one was a 19-year-old. and they very kindly asked me to do the tasting notes, which are on the box.
So this is just plain Bruichladdich in Ichem. It's not Rins.
No.
Okay. Because there's something, and that's what's really interesting. I've been lucky enough to try a few of the Bruichladdich Ichem casks. We had one under management for a while. I didn't manage to bottle it because the price was just eye-watering.
Too high.
Yeah, unfortunately so. But we bottled some of the other bits and pieces. One of Stevie's first ever kind of like wow moments with whiskey was our Port Charlotte von Romane, which is just phenomenal. I love what they did with all the wine casks. But this is where it gets so interesting to me, because Bruichladdich by itself can be hit or miss, particularly for me when it's young. 10-year-old the laddie, it's a bit too butyric-y. And I think that with the wine influence, there's a whole host of different flavors that you can get. And to me, this tastes almost like there's an element of that kind of sulfury.
Yeah.
Do you know? It's like a hint to it.
On the finish, I definitely get a little bit of struck match.
Right.
But we've had this conversation. I'm a more sulfur intolerant than you are.
It's always everything in whiskey is up for debate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Abelard I've had with sulfur, and you could easily do a whole program just on that.
Yeah.
But I like the idea that this man, based down in my home county of Cornwall, was able to get what he'd asked for. Often these days, you can't stipulate. You know, in the old days, it was guaranteed that you could. I remember in the Diageo world, recently I had a 1920s Johnny Walker Black that was bottled for Argentina, and they specified it had to be extra sweet. So it was all sherry cask to a degree. Nothing like Black Label now, but back then sales weren't as buoyant as they are now, that people were able to, or markets, wholesalers were able to say, this is the kind of flavour that I want.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actively look out for 50s and 60s bottlings of Italian Black Label.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So for me, tasting Bruichladdich in Ichem before with Jim McEwen in the warehouse during Feshiel, an Isle of Festival, and with 600 people, obviously the atmosphere added to it. And sometimes people say to me, you know, does that really matter? And I go, well, it's a bit like taking this. I'm down in Cornwall growing up, and I have fish and chips. I have cod in batter and some chips. I come to London, I go into the River Cafe, and I have line-caught Newlyn cod with various other vegetables to put it together. And all of a sudden, it's metamorphosized into something, as I just read to you, into something completely different. You know, it's now got like this has now got a leather coat. And the best examples I find in this wonderful world that I've been in for the last 30, 35 years, I find when I'm doing tastings, the best thing is to be able to have two complete opposites so that people can see where that one is at,
right?
I.e. the one that's so far out, it's in, if you get me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
So, for example, I used to do Hay Club with Lagavulin 16. It's fantastic because everybody will get it.
Yes.
Everybody. But you could show a couple of Speysides, say a Ben Rinnes and a Glendullan or something, and if they're both bourbon casks, they're made for blending to a particular style.
Yep.
There's no variation on it so much, you know. Diageo, and as most companies can, they can decide what they're going to do with that distillery.
Yeah.
Bruichladdich said, let's try everything.
Yeah.
You know, I remember being in the warehouse with Jim, and he goes, okay, that's Sangiovese, that's Chardonnay, that's Chenin Blanc, etc. And I goes, what do you reckon? He goes, I have no idea. He goes, but one of them
One of them's going to be amazing.
could well be the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
And for me, for that gentleman he sent me up samples of the 16 and the 19. And I said, look, he said, what do you want? I said, I want nothing, but if you want to give me a sample, I'll share it with like-minded people, which is what we're doing today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much
So
for
it's
sharing,
got some
Colin.
legs to it.
Yeah.
The French oak has given it a little bit of a bite. I'm just going to take a little sip for a moment, so excuse me.
No, I think you're absolutely right there. And what you've just highlighted for me is like, there's no better way to try a whiskey than with one in each hand. It's comparison, it's contrast, it's getting involved. And you're absolutely right when there are those contrasts. For me, that's what makes Bruichladdich one of my favorite distilleries. My personal favorite is the Port Charlotte Spirit. As you well know, Ian, it's just such a challenging liquid. And I think that it suits all of the different maturation styles so well. But what they did for modern day whiskey, like you say, they kind of led the way with regards to wine casks.
Massive.
And I think what Mark Rainier did there is phenomenal. The fact that he was able to bring those contacts over into whiskey. We were always talking about it on the show and in our work life as well. The synergy between different, completely different industries that have so much in common. And, for me, the only slight shame of it is where a lot of these old school wineries still work in their ways, whereas we don't want our name on that, so they've had to bottle like the MRC. And for those in the know, it's, you know what it is. Yeah. But I think that there is so much to be said for more collaboration. But I would say that as an independent bottler, wouldn't I?
Yeah, of course. I'm sure you would know more than me, but I'm aware that particularly big companies, with the growth in single malt sales, the demand to keep more than selling to independents is bigger than ever. To get single casks of Talisker or something now, I'm sure would be quite hard.
Oh God, I'd love to.
Do you understand? It is. I totally understand it, but from the world of blends, where distilleries were workhorses, to where they are now, I mean, I'm not sure anybody can predict the future. I know that in 2002, when I was at Kalila and they released it as a single malt commercially for the first time, and the distillery has been there since 1846. And the distillery manager, who's been there for 35 years, and before him it was his father, and before him it was his father, 96 years in one family, and nobody goes to visit there apart from the directors of the company that own it. To 2002, people are coming from Japan and Germany and Sweden, and all of a sudden he's going, my whole life has changed.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Kalila, from being virtually all Johnny Walker, they used to sell a few bottles to companies like Sostanti and those Italian importers, and a few bottles in the shop. But in the main, you couldn't buy it. And all of a sudden, there's a 12-year-old and an 18 and a 25. Now there's 8 different Kalilas. Do you get me? And I've just come back from the festival where we were drawing straight from the Valinge, straight from the barrel, a 22-year-old. And I hate saying this because it means I've tasted it and you haven't, right? A 22-year-old single Oloroso cask Kalila that should be bottled in its own right.
Yeah.
It's that good. But, in some cases, companies don't want to release lots of single casks. And if it did go to an independent, people would say, well, if the independents can get this, why don't they do it? It's one of those, And the minute you start saying, oh, that one barrel of Kalila 22-year-old, outstanding, we're only going to get 203 bottles from it. How do you split that around the world? And you go, maybe a barrel for each country? But hey, it's decisions that people have to make. And I'm just glad that distilleries like Kalila, and going back to Bruichladdich now, there are hundreds of expressions. I'm sure they don't know for sure. They've all got, a lot of them have got really good backstories. They call themselves, if I'm not mistaken, progressive Hebridean distillers.
Correct.
Which is a great description. I love that. And they are, and their gin, what's the name of their gin again?
Botanist.
Yeah,
it's really good gin.
They've good marketing. Every bar in Islay has the Botanist when you order a gin and tonic.
Yeah.
That's what you want, you know? So I like what they're doing. In fact, I'm a big fan of every distillery on Islay on what they're doing. You know, even if it means an unpeated Lefroy, give it a go. You know, you won't find the purists will buy into that, but there may just be some newbies who go, actually, I quite like that. And then you give them a Lefroy 10 and say, well, this is where it goes to.
Yeah.
Do you get me? It's a bit, that's how I see it. So I'm very happy that this gentleman down in Cornwall is able to, the 19 is more rounded. The finish was slightly longer than I thought. Dusty, very dry. If the wine influence has much effect, it's the mouthfeel. It was almost like, just for a while, I got like a glycol note. And this is on sale in Cornwall at Constantine stores, and that's it. And it's only a few bottles because he's keeping them for himself.
Yep.
So I love the idea that an individual can come to someone and say, can I buy a barrel of your whiskey? Whether it's, you know, somebody like Bruichladdich or a newer distillery, or even these days coming to an independent bottler, which I think you can do.
Oh,
with you.
listen,
I
yeah,
could
do all
come
the
to you
time.
and say, look, this is the style that I'd like.
Yeah.
Could you see over a period of a year, maybe, if you can source something like that? I'd be interested.
If people come to me and say, I want a bottle of whiskey, I get so excited. We have loads of people coming to us saying, I want to invest in whiskey. And we say, we don't do that. We don't sell investments. But if you want to get whiskey in a bottle and exactly like you've done here, whether it's laying it down for the long term, something to enjoy and watch it grow and maybe re-rack it from one cask into another, amazing. So behind that. We've done a bunch of, we've actually just done a bespoke bottling there for a golf club nearby. Very excited. We're delivering it next week. And I can't wait. It's going to be great to have that, you know, out and they've got a whole tournament going on and we're going to be able to share it. It's phenomenal. I love that sort of stuff.
Wow.
You know,
I mean,
really, really
I mean, effectively, and I touched on that in that little piece I read, right? It's something that's been around for ages and ages, right? The Walker family. People will come in and say, I want a whiskey. What flavour would you like?
Yeah.
I'll go to the back and I'll mix it up for you, just like I do with all those teas that I have. And that was how it was.
Yeah.
So the fact that you can still do that in 2024, long may that last.
100%.
You know?
Yeah.
So I'm going to come to Jake and say, listen, I'd like you to find me a cask of Mizunara, similar to a Carizoa bourbon cask.
I'm going to say, Colin, come to the warehouse with me. You can find it yourself. That's a challenge and a half, right? Very
So
good.
I think ultimately where it's going to finish on this, because I could talk for hours about it, as you probably noticed, where the cask come from, I think names will start appearing. I was asked last week, where do you get them? What name is on? Is it Buffalo Trace? Is it, you know? Somebody said to me, where did Van Winkle get their casks? Where did Carizoa get their casks? Oh, they do a bourbon edition. What bourbon was it? People want to know these things. They'll buy into it.
Yeah.
And I just picked up recently a mezcal that's been aged in Van Winkle casks. And I bought it simply because I like 20-year-old and 12-year-old Van Winkle.
Right.
And thought, well, that'll be interesting one evening.
For sure.
With the right company and the
definitely.
right surroundings. Makes
No,
sense?
I completely agree. I think, like we're saying, more collaboration, the better, because that's what people want is, okay, well, I enjoyed that. And if I know that that influence is going to be here, I can take my experience and the knowledge that I'm getting from one expression, whether it be a mezcal or a bourbon or a Scotch or a Irish or whatever, you know, move on to the next one.
I'd love to see it. I mean, I think Cam should be, you know, proud that their casts have got this right. This to me, like there are a lot of Sauternes expressions I find kind of a bit disappointing. They're not actually they don't have the sweetness you'd expect from them. They can be a little bit astringent, a little bit bitter. This, as exactly as you said, Colin, mouthfeel amazing. It has exactly the kind of, it's even got like a Sauternes-esque colour to it as well. And the influence is absolutely spot on. And when you produce something like that, there's no reason why you shouldn't be collaborating on it, because it's the perfect way of saying, right, we're friends.
Exactly. You said the 19 was more rounded. Because I think that's really quite a well, like you say, there's
I
a
did
bit of
actually-
everything going on.
Yeah, I
here.
mean, I did actually think about bringing them, as I said, back to back.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, because it's like saying, right, here's Colin at 19 and here's Colin at 23.
Yeah.
Look what's happened, good or bad.
Yep.
Because just because it's aged that extra 3 years, it doesn't necessarily make it better.
No, could have been
what
on
I
a big
mean?
heroin
I'm
binge.
really not into numbers. I know that people that I've worked with are,
Yep.
but me personally, numbers don't really mean too much. I'm more interested in the liquid and the story that go with it, because I've been disappointed too many times.
Yeah.
Somebody gave me a Talisker 50, and it's the worst Talisker I'd ever tried. It'd been in the wood too long. Beautiful packaging, nice silk and all of that. But I felt let down that it was an independent bottler that was selling it, and it was a bad example of Talisker. So whether it's a 3-year-old, like some of the young whiskies that come out of the States, or whether it's a 33-year-old or something like a Tormore or something, right? If the whiskey stands up to the age, fantastic. And I've always said, look, don't be fooled by age. I'm 71, coming on 72. I was much better when I was 23, right? And the same can apply to a whiskey. Jim McEwen and Jim used to say to me that he thought whiskey had that sweet spot, Bamor, between 12 and 18, with the 17 probably being the DNA of Bamor when he was there. And most distilleries have a sweet spot. The rest are experiments.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good examples and points of reference to kind of
Experiments,
compare.
Lagavulin, which we're going to come on to later. Is it best at 16 or is it best at 8, 10, 12?
We've just been trying the 8 there, Reece. I love the 8. Oh my God, it's sensational.
Should we move on to the second one?
I was going to say, let me pour the
I'm
second one. We'll keep
rabbiting
talking.
away here.
What have we got? Whiskey Sponge,
Yes,
Isla Single Malt.
1992, I believe.
It is indeed 1992.
So that's an
Sorry, I'm taking it all for myself, mate.
one of that package of unnamed Lefroy casks. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I was there in 1992 at Lefroy. Thank you so much. And they have a manager there, or had a manager there, a wonderful human being by the name of Ian Henderson. And Ardbeg was closed down at the time. I think it was Allied Distillers who owned it, but it was closed. And Ian used to have to go up to Ardbeg twice a year just to run the stills.
Oh, wow, really?
So that if it sold,
It was ticking over.
it worked.
Right. Proof of concept. We've made this there a few months back.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's gas.
That's like having an oven that you never use. So just turn it on. And
That's so funny. And to think that now most distilleries are running 24/7.
Yeah.
And there was a time where it was like, I'll just
yeah.
run up the hill and check that that's still on.
Right.
It's happened with a few places. 'Cause I think Highland Park did that with Scapa as
Yeah,
well, a period
yeah.
in the 80s.
Well, the amazing thing is with this, and this is bottled by Decadent Drinks. I can't remember the gentleman's name now. You probably, what's he called?
Angus.
Angus, right? Angus is a very astute young man, and I've known him not deeply, but I've known him from when he used to work at Ardbeg. He did a summer at Ardbeg, and when this came out, he was able to get hold through Signatory. There was a small parcel of barrels that didn't signify whether it was Ardbeg or Lefroy. So the debate was, it could be an Ardbeg. It may be a Lefroy, because those casks that were filled with the new make back in 92, they went into the Lefroy warehouse. So the debate has always been kind of for geeks. just when you thought you'd seen it all. Then came Ardbeg, matured in a Lafroig warehouse. So is it an Ardbeg or is it a Lafroig? General opinion, because nobody knows for sure. General appeal findings is that it's Lafroig. But, you know, if you want to believe it's from Ardbeg, go right ahead.
Absolutely.
It's a bit like being
Part of the
with a
magic.
guy. Have any of you guys heard of a distillery called Malt Mill? Malt Mill.
Not sure I have, actually.
Malt Mill? Fantastic. Look at this. Malt Mill, the second distillery at Lagavulin from 1906 to 1963. The second distillery at Lagavulin, heavily peated, up there with the Port Charlottes. Malt Mill. Never bottled as a single malt. Only went into blends. Malt Mill. In fact, there was a movie that came out with Charles MacLaine as a guest appearance.
Yeah, I saw that movie.
You seen that?
Yeah, I've seen that movie.
It was called Malt Mill.
Was it?
Yeah.
Where there's young
It's
kids
this cask.
sneaking into the warehouse
Yeah.
and he puts it in a Lucasade bottle or
There
something.
you go. There you go. So there is in my younger days when I was like a sponge, see what I did there? Sucking up all that atmosphere. And I go to the Lagavulin office and there's the manager, Donald Rennick. And I goes, what's in the safe, Donald? And he goes, there's a miniature of new make malt mill. It's the only expression still around.
That's mad.
And the phone rang and he said, I got to go in a minute. And I'm looking at that safe.
See you later.
Fucking hell. This is the holy grail here, you know.
Rummaging around for the
It's
keys.
still it's now in a glass case at Lagavulin, if you go up there. And the bottom line was then that malt mill, you couldn't buy it. It was only in a blend. But I've been at tastings on Isla where the super serious geeks are. And this one particular gentleman, no names, has gone, right, this is a 1960s Lagavulin. And this is a 1960s blend called Ainsley's, which would have had some malt mill in it. So we're going to try it. So we all jumped onto that carousel of going, we're going to be tasting malt mill in this whiskey. And we had this wonderful moment. Well, now in the cold light of day, sitting here in London is, I don't know whether there was any in there or not.
But it's a good story.
But
and you were in it, you
on
were
there,
involved in it on the day, right?
I picked some flowers from Lagavulin Bay and put on the table, and we've had oysters and scallops, and we've drunk Ainsley's blend containing malt mill.
So,
You know, that's how Shaggy Dog stories start.
Yeah. If only Jake and Stevie had such a look on their face when we opened that bottle of Black Rod.
That was disgusting. You can't even bring that into the equation there.
No, I don't think it was any
I'm
malt mill
sure
in that.
malt mill will turn up one day. You know, I mean, in my ambassadorial days, if I was at a seaside resort, like talking in front of bartenders in Bournemouth, I'd go out or send somebody out if I didn't do it myself to bury a bottle of Talisker in the sand.
Right, yeah.
And after the training session, I'd say, let's get some fresh air, guys. And we'd walk across the beach and I'd kick the sand and there's a bottle of Talisker. And the previous night, I've put the bottle of Talisker label with a whole pot of cold tea over the label so that it makes it all brown and old. And then I just stick a bunch of little plastic cups in the back pocket and go, Jesus Christ, what's that? And they go, and of course, youth. You know, William Blake talks about innocence and experience. That innocence is when you believe it.
For sure.
Yep.
It's Talisker from 100
And you go
years
away
ago.
and tell your friends, you'll never guess what happened. I was with this short, bald-headed Cornish guy. And he kicked the sand, and there was a fucking ball there.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of stuff like that, nighttime tastings. Talk about Lafroig. Go down to in the early days of Fesh. This was my 25th, I can't believe it. But in the early ones, I used to go down to Lafroig and Lagavulin at midnight with some friends. And you've been there? You've been to Lagavulin?
Yeah.
Lafroig? So security was very lax in those days. And I used to take a bottle down there, and under 1,000 stars, we drink whiskey. And with the castle across the way. And it's a shaker. It's a mover. And all you can hear is the sound of the stills. And it's quite a little moment, if you can imagine that. And that was before they put security guards there, obviously. But finding that moment, the castle at Lagavulin?
Yep.
I used to do midnight tastings up there.
That's awesome.
Not allowed now. And I could, which I won't, but I could, I find places, particularly at Isla, the lighthouse. If any of you know Isla, the Port Ellen Lighthouse.
Yep.
Yeah. Which is, I go down there when it's windy and wet and raining, and by the lighthouse there with the Atlantic coming in, it's a shaker. It's quite cathartic, and particularly if you've got people who've maybe this is their first trip to the island, you're engaging sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste.
Yeah.
If you get those 5 together in the right place with the right people at the right time, giggity, 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 you nailed it. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
So Lafroig.
And this is definitely old school Lafroig. You can taste it. I've done tastings I've been very lucky to try Lafroig from like the 80s and the 90s. And there is something to be said, I think, for the distillery not running at capacity. It tastes very different. And again, texture is a big thing here, right?
Yep.
See, that flavour was not liked when I started in the industry. When I was in retail in the 1990s, all of a sudden in this wine and spirit shop that I was working at, they decided to break open the malt whiskey world. And the only people that you could buy from was Gordon and MacPhail. They had everything.
Yeah.
In fact, I put them down. My 2 great heroes are Gordon MacPhail and the Milroy brothers.
Right.
Milroy brothers introduced single malts to London, effectively in Soho. And that Lafroig is pretty damn good, actually, coming back to it.
It's delicious.
Yep.
You familiar with the Milroy boys and what they've done what they did for the industry?
I mean, I never met them, unfortunately.
I mean, this is, dare I say it, I used to go into, let me finish the story first, right? So we got in all these whiskies from Gordon MacPhail. Brewer 72, Ardbeg 74, need I go on? Know nothing about them. First time I tasted Brewer. What is this? This is unlike any of these other whiskies. They've got plenty of it, and it's all at 40%. Ardbeg 74. Wow, 40%. Sell a bottle of Ardbeg to a guy, comes back the next day, he's returning it. It's open, he's returning it. And he said to me, I'm returning this bottle because the flavour is terrible. I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, it tastes like smoke. Guess what? The Gordon MacPhail bottles didn't say that. In fact, it didn't even give a description. So he was right. So I said, let me take that back and I'll do some tests on it.
Make sure.
Because I was familiar with that flavour. But back then, smoky whiskies were not really about. Hence, Ardbeg closed, Bruichladdich closed, Port Ellen for other reasons, but they all closed. Lafroig broke that thing that said you can't like whiskey with flavour. And for Whiskey Sponge to find or be able to access a cask from Signatory, which I believe is where he got it from,
Right.
as some of his others are. And he's got a good nose for a good whiskey.
This is a very good whiskey.
Do you know what I mean?
This is up there with some of the best Lefroy I've ever had.
And it wasn't massively expensive. In relation to a 27-year-old Islay whiskey,
For sure.
if that was a distillery bottling, think 4 figures,
Yeah.
right? In this modern world. This was, if I remember right, I paid around about £200 for it.
Right. I mean, in today's market, that's
Yeah.
ridiculously good, isn't it? But,
Yeah, and it meant that I've got a drinkable old Lefroy at home, as opposed to I've tasted. I'll never say better, but I'll say different. My one of my favourite Lefroys was at the Islay Festival, and this guy produced a Lefroy from the 1960s that was bottled for a bar in New York, 100% Oloroso.
Wow.
Boom. So, not saying, because I'm not a massive fan of sherry. Sherry, yes, but sherry-infused whiskies. My palate changes all the time. But that Lefroy, you know, I don't get a chance to drink 100% Oloroso cask Lefroy. So, and then add into the equation bottle age. Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what, you know, that's what grinds my gears or gets me going. Do you know what I mean? It's like, listen, it's Indiana Jones in search of a new flavor.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're all trying to find a new flavor. And sometimes you got to go back. It's interesting that I've heard that Sukhinder Singh with the new distillery Port Narun on Islay, he wants to make whiskey like Bamor made in the 60s. Tropical fruit, mango, lychee, guava.
Yeah.
I was working for Bamor and I could not believe in the warehouse I'm tasting Alsace Gewürztraminer and then it's a whiskey in the same glass.
Yeah.
Do you get me?
What are we adding to these casks? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just
It's phenomenal. Yeah, no, it is.
It's phenomenal. And if you're a wine lover, as I am, to be able to get a certain style. I mean, I remember when, because I like to have fun with whiskey, guy said to me, how do you get that flavour in that Bamor, in that 57 Bamor of mango and lychee and pineapple? I says, well, we get some cans of Del Monte.
I just met up with an American client of mine recently who said, oh, well, you add the chocolate and the coffee to the cask, right? He had bought some of the Macallan, whatever, the cacao. Or
yeah.
And I was like, no. He's like, well, I was talking to somebody who swore blind. I was like, he's taking me for a ride.
Yeah, so
unfortunately, no. And but you're right. Sometimes you taste these things, and particularly old school Bamor, and I haven't had as many of them as I would like to have had. But
you know, the man from Del Monte was famous for
Yeah.
saying yes, right? So
Yes.
give him a pineapple cask.
And just to finish on this, these are just a few miles apart.
and so vastly different, right?
Yeah.
Particularly now that you can go compare, as they say in the adverts, right? Bam. The Sauternes is sweetened out now on the nose. And the Lefroy is...
Some phenomenal whiskies you brought us here. Will we move on to the next one as well, Colin? I don't want to rush through them, but I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
I apologise if I'm talking way too much.
You never apologise, so that's absolutely fine. The next one is Convalmore 32-year-old.
Right, this may be oxidised a little because I've been drinking it slowly.
Don't care.
Over the last
Sharing it.
7 years.
Yes.
Good man yourself. I like it. It's lasted. You're paying it its due
I should
respect.
have put it into a smaller bottle, to be
No.
honest.
Oh, sorry. Stevie's gesturing. Show the bottle to the people at home. There we go. I mean, 32-year-old Convalmore.
Natural cask strength, 48.2%.
There you
I
go.
love it when stuff kind of
Drops
just
to that
decreases to
natural-
about that kind of level.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. You know, the people that I meet in the industry, I know there's a hardcore who want super high strength. You know, I'm in various whiskey clubs where if it isn't in the high 50s, it's not to their, thank you, it's not to their taste. And I'm not with all that.
I think there's definitely
there's
a place
market.
for higher strength
I do,
whiskies. But when it's of serious age, you want that.
Yeah.
It's that natural mellowing. It's the liquid relaxing into the cask and the flavor profile and all the rest of it. I think that sometimes the issue is, and I think Stevie's very good for saying it as well, sometimes you get whiskies nowadays that are quite thin. And if they're just watered down to a 40% for the sake of,
I know,
revenue and capitalism, that is disappointing. But a natural strength 48 or even bringing it down a bit again, like we tried, what was it? It was the Glenglassower 30, 42%.
Yeah.
It's been watered down, definitely. My God, does it sing at 42% though? So this is the thing, I think. But like you say, about natural 47 to sort of 50, 51, 52.
Yeah. This, strangely enough, even though the bottle is disappearing with the right kind of people, that's still got a nice, delicate acetone note.
Yes. On
the nose.
Yeah, you've missed out for a hot second there, Jake. I'm having a moment over here.
Oh, go on.
Did you get, isn't it?
Yeah.
Honestly, I get more of a buzz nosing half the time than tasting.
Right.
Sometimes I'm nosing for 20 minutes. People say, Colin, how long have you been into whiskey foreplay? And I says, well, you got to set the scene, Chief. You know what I mean?
Definitely. We get told all the time on the podcast, just stop bloody sniffing it, drink it already.
Yeah.
So, well, just give me a minute. Getting there.
I was at a festival a few weeks ago, and I'm making some notes on these whiskies that I'm going to be talking about, a bit like today, really. And I seen a bunch of students looking at me, and one of them has stupidly said, look, that's Colin Dunn over there. Let's see how he does it. Let's see how he evaluates. And I heard them. So I went, I had my pen and paper, and I picked up the whiskey and I gave it a real good shake, and I went. And I wrote down some notes. Shook it around a little. And the guy, one of the students, he goes, is that how you evaluate whiskey?
You're a devil.
And I said, is there any other way? Just to see the look of incredulity on his face.
Yeah.
Gas.
I mean, again, that would have been perfect with a Talisk or something. It's like, getting the sound of the ocean.
Oh, my favourite. I've got to tell you this, if you don't mind, because seriously, to me, when I was invited, which I'm very grateful to, stories.
It's what we're all about, 100%.
So, COVID, right? COVID.
Oh.
New York, a bar in Brooklyn. I'm doing a training session for them. They've got Kalila and Lagavulin. I'm in my flat in West London, late in the evening, and there's, 30, 35 bartenders, all on Zoom, and I'm engaging with them. And I thought, I'm going to have a bit of fun. It's been a long day. I'm on my 4th Zoom, and I hold up, just like this, I hold up the Kalila, and I said, if you look really closely there, you can see a Hebridean sunset right there. And they've all in their little squares. And they've gone, awesome, fantastic. Hey, it only works with Kalila. Doesn't work with any other distillery. The sun kisses the barrels.
Blag artist, if I've ever met one. I love it. Good man.
And they're all go, wow, awesome. Anyway, I go like that, and I get carried away, and the Kalila hits the laptop. Good night, New York.
Oh no. You left them on a good note.
And
at
I
least.
sat down and, well, that was a buzz.
Good crack.
That's the last thing they'll remember with
Very
this
good crack.
short bald-headed Cornish guy, as I call myself. That, have you seen that Hebridean sunset? I jest.
There's a lot going on here. I think this is my favourite yet. This is
what blew me away.
Seriously impressive.
There's certain whiskies that some people just don't get, and others go crazy. Petit Vaque's one of those.
Right.
It is. Pity. I've seen people go, this is phenomenal. I've heard other people go, no wonder they closed it.
Right.
Yeah. I'm being honest, I don't get it.
Hey, nor did I until with a Czech Republic whiskey club lined up a tasting of 7 different Petit Vakes from independent bottlers as well as special releases, I could see the DNA and why some people liked it. You know, it's just that weird thing. Convermore, I did a trade show in London. This one particular guy bought 500 bottles. He goes, "That's the only whiskey I'm going to drink for the rest of my life."
Oh shit.
And I'm going to get it now.
That's dedication.
Blew me away. He could do it as well. And he did do it because I seen the sale go through. And it just blew me away that a whiskey that maybe you don't get can have such an impact on a person.
Yeah.
That's why I always have respect. If somebody said to me, "I really love Loch Dew," right? I go, I understand. Because for 2 years, a lot of people did.
Right.
You could buy it for £14.99 in Victoria Wine, and the sales were phenomenal. I didn't work for the company that was making it, but I knew that it was great value for 15 quid when nobody knew anything about whiskey.
Yeah.
When people had not evaluated it. It's a bit like saying, right, we've got nothing to eat apart from bread and lard, so you eat it. And then somebody goes, "Do you know what? You can get some tuna and sweet corn and put on that, and it tastes a bit better." And all of a sudden, a bad example, right? But it changes.
Yeah.
Loch Dew is a great example. So in a tasting of Loch Dew, I did a tasting of 7, changing the subject slightly, and I apologise, 7 different Mannockmores.
Right.
7. Mannockmore is one of the most, I used to say in my Diageo days, it's the nearest thing to a Japanese style whiskey. Fragrant, incense.
It's very delicate.
Delicate, yeah. Like,
Boom. It made Loch Dew. In the 7 that we tried, the last one was Loch Dew.
Right. Fair.
What gives? I know what gives. E150.
This is amazing, though. This is.
You see?
I'm getting kind of like almost like a lemony pledge note.
It changed. I think some of the great whiskies I've tried keep changing. Keep changing. I had coconut about 5 minutes ago before I went on a talk. And I love the nose.
There's a really wonderful, sweet,
Right?
But
This is the kind of nose. In the old days, says me, when I worked for the Japanese and I got introduced to Hibiki for the first time, for 2 years, I wore Hibiki as my aftershave because it had hints of sandalwood.
yeah.
And I used to buy an aftershave called Yoji Yamamoto because of that sandalwood note. So I'd be in the clubs in town, going back a few years now, obviously, and after the women have had a few drinks and I look normal, they go, "Colin, what are you wearing?" And I go, "Hibiki." 17.
you wouldn't want to be doing that nowadays. Cost you a
Because
fucking
of that
fortune.
smell.
For sure.
Because of that smell.
Oh, yeah.
And even Rosebank, right? I'm talking, when I think of it now, and this, there might be a few people who will go, Philistine, but it is a Sunday, right? I used to have a load of Rosebank Flora and Faunas, right? And I loved the aromatic complexities, so much so that I put some into an aromatizer, and my flat would have Rosebank. And people would come in and go, "What's that?" Rosebank.
I mean, it has the right name for it, right?
Yeah, for sure. You'd get away with it for somebody who didn't know. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. You couldn't say, "Old Fetter Cairn."
No.
Might not have had the same effect though either.
So Convermore has got that bewitching complexity to change in the glass. And this, like you said, this is a few years old.
It still stands up so well.
I
Though. You
honestly-
said to me, "Oh, it's oxidized quite a bit."
I thought it might,
It's still standing up really, really nicely. I mean, if there was more than this to begin with, then wow. I mean, seriously exceptional. But
listen, I won't go into the history of it. It used to be a grain distillery. Then it changed to a malt whiskey distillery. On the coast, near Glen Elgin. workhorse distillery. But there's always some barrels that, thankfully, the malt man goes, do you know what? Let's keep these aside and let's age them. And there are, thankfully, some old casks around. There's a 32. Is that the 32, right?
32,
This is the
yeah.
32.
There's a 36
Right.
as well. For me, when that came out, 200 quid or something.
Can't argue that at all, can you?
No.
I know it was a little while ago.
Yeah.
But I understand why that gentleman decided to buy 500 bottles.
Yep.
I understood it totally. Because every now and again, something comes along, you know, and you could go through names. You know, I know in the club that I was chatting to people the other week, Jesus, the whole club is Springbank crazy. It's almost like Springbank don't bring out anything that's bad. Do you know what I mean? And I grew up on the Springbanks, the local barleys, the original local barleys for 95 quid. And they were phenomenal. And they still are phenomenal, except they're more expensive now.
Yep.
And they're managing to keep their authenticity and their integrity, and long may that last. I used to say to bartenders, they said, what's the definition of a good whiskey bar? Any bar that's got Springbank in it.
Right.
That was my definition, and still is. If they've got Springbank, it means somebody knew something,
Yeah. For sure.
because they're not spending it on advertising.
But again, I mean, this is the thing. We go back to, the Lafroig there, and, the fact that the stills rest, like Springbank are producing, 40% of their capacity nowadays? So they're still focused entirely on quality and making sure that they don't go through the same whiskey glut. They end up, it's all about the brand and longevity and
love it.
sustainability for the community and bringing great whiskey to the table. And
Love
they
it.
do exactly that.
Oh, I love what they're doing.
Oh, we love them
Honestly.
as well. Absolutely.
When
Big
I
shout out
worked
to
for an
Springbank. but-
independent wine merchant in the year 2000 for the millennium, I bought a barrel of Springbank for the company I worked for, a 9-year-old Springbank. And the company I worked, they were primarily wine. I had the whiskey portfolio, and it was great to be able to turn them on to a distillery they'd not even heard of. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't that big a name. But again, this is the beauty of when you get into whiskey. And I know from my limited time talking to you that you live it and breathe it. You love it. And that's what I do. That's
sure.
what I've been doing. And it's the best feeling,
Yeah.
particularly when you meet people who feel the same way as you do,
Yeah.
maybe doing something different. Like, say, as an ambassador, you've got to try to be as honest as you can and try to be as personable as you can and not just doing the blurb that you've been given.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, thankfully, I've managed to stayed in Diageo for 16 years and Suntory for 8 by not selling my soul.
Yeah.
It's the best feeling that I'm still the same guy that I was 25, 30 years ago when I started a whiskey club. And from that became B'More's first ever ambassador.
That's how you got into it. Or you started a whiskey
Jim
club.
McEwen said, we want you to be our first ambassador in the UK. And I thought, should I change from wine to whiskey? He said, come to Islay. I went there. I won a trip there for selling. And I was blown away by the people.
Yeah.
They reminded me of where I come from.
Oh, Islay is a special place, isn't it? Yeah,
Right?
100%.
I come from a place called St. Ives in Cornwall, and the people are identical. If you pay them a little bit of respect, they'll respect you. If you come onto their little patch or their island and you mess it up,
Forget it.
forget it.
Yeah.
You might as well leave.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just going back to this Lafroig sensational. Will we move on to the next, Colin?
Yeah, I think we should.
Can we have a couple more glasses there, Stevie, please?
Sorry about this.
Can we? Sorry about what? I'm having a grand old time here.
God, no, are we
you're
on time okay?
Oh, wait, how are we doing for time?
Yeah, we've got half an hour.
Oh, good.
Taking
Till
forward.
4 o'clock. I don't know what time we do.
Yeah, good. I won't keep you too long then. So what have we got? 3 to do, 4 to do. Fantastic.
So this is a 1985 Cragganmore. This is from the special releases last year. Or the Prima and Ultima.
I'm not even sure it's from either of them. When I left Diageo, Emma Walker gave me 3 sample bottles as a thank you.
Oh, cool. This is one of them?
Yes.
You haven't touched
Oh my
it?
God.
I've drunk the other 2.
Okay.
I've not touched this.
that
And
the
this
first
is what I like to do is be hopefully blown away myself. Do you get me?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Now, I'll tell you what you can do. You give me way too much. I don't mean that derogatorily, because you're being very kind, but I can't drink too much at the moment. Do you want to take half of that back? Is that okay? Because I won't drink it and I want to be able to appreciate it. Thank you so much. So Emma gave me, thank you, a Port Ellen, a Caledonian grain,
Okay.
and this.
Wow.
So I've
It's an
drunk-
all right little send off, isn't it?
Emma Walker is now the master blender.
Yeah.
And she's wonderful, and to do that, to make a gesture, because she knew that I was a big fan of the Caledonian. Have you ever tried the 40-year-old special releases? Maybe not?
No, I haven't tried that one. I do have, I've got an independent old Caledonian open
have
at the
you?
minute. Master of Malt did one, very good, but it's 48-year-old, I think. It was like 200 quid.
Yeah, grain's a good value.
Yeah,
If you like the style, obviously.
absolutely.
If that number, sometimes, they could easily put a higher price. The Port Ellen was excellent. Port Ellen is, the nearest flavour to Port Ellen is Kalila. I've got a 10-year-old Port Ellen at home. A 10-year-old. That was bottled or sold in a barrel on the last day that Port Ellen was open in 1983. Signatory bought 5 barrels on the last day. And all they had was 10-year-old. And it all went into blends, right? And 4 of them got released. This is the Port Ellen at 43%. One of them went out at cask strength with a bottle of Isla water
Amazing.
in a little packet.
Love it.
And I was with Sukhinder Singh in his offices in Park Royal, and often he used to go, tell me what you think, blind taste. And I said, that's a young Kalila. He goes, it's a young Port Ellen. They were similar. And back in 83, when it closed down, one of them had to go.
Yeah.
For rights or wrongs, I won't get into the politics of it. Lagavulin was going to stay, and it was between Kalila and Port Ellen, but they could make more whiskey at Kalila than they could at Port Ellen. Sometimes they had problems with the water, etc. So it lost its way. But a lovely story, because that's why we're here, is Port Ellen was named after the wife of the laird that owned that part of Islay, Walter Campbell, Walter Frederick Campbell. His wife was called Ellen. And at the age of 33, maybe 34, she passed away. And in memoriam, Walter Campbell renamed the village after her,
Right.
Port Ellen. And they had a daughter called Charlotte.
I see where this is going.
Yeah.
I could go on, I'm not going to, because this is where I'm saying, behind every name, there's a story.
For sure.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Just that sheer fact. So when I did my first class on Port Ellen at the Whisky Show, I phoned up somebody on Ireland and said, is there anybody still alive who worked at the distillery back in the 60s and 70s, 80s? And I got this elderly gentleman, and I said, hello there. He went, hello. I said, look, I'm doing this tasting on Port Ellen, and I want to be really authentic and tell the stories from people like you who worked there. He said, you mean worked at Ballyneal? I said, no, Port Ellen. He said, Ballyneal. I goes, what's this Ballyneal? He goes, well, that's what the area was called before Walter Campbell's wife died. And I said, are you sure? Because I've got 100 whiskey books here.
It's not
and I
mentioned.
can't see it. And he goes, have you heard of Margaret's story? I goes, yep. She's written a book on Islay. He goes, right, go to page 217. Got the book down. There's a map of Islay. Ballyneal.
Gas.
It's not on Google. But be able to, and that was one of about 10 things that he gave me
Yeah.
that I was able to give over at the tasting, so that even the geeks were impressed. You know what I mean? And I didn't know. And of course, he said Bally in Gaelic means farm, and Neil was the name of the family, and the farms were given out by the Lord of the Isles. I'm going, oh, keep it coming. This is fantastic. You know what I mean? And next minute, I'm drinking Port Ellen in Ballyneal, if you get my drift.
Captive audience there.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
So, one of my favourite distilleries, and I don't say that lightly, in Diageo, because they've got some bloody good distilleries that don't really see the light of day. I could name them, you know, the Ben Rinnes's of this world. It's of that style, that heavy, rich style, that they Marmite, almost meaty style. Obviously, Mortlach. Glenkinchy's come on a bundle now. Different casks, experiments going on. Fantastic. Kleinlich, you know, I know the old Kleinlich, those heavy wax candle Kleinlich are very special but very expensive. Maybe down the line, Kleinlich over a period of time will age. Oban, big fan of Oban. I'm looking at value for money. Even distilleries like Blair Athol. If Blair Athol didn't go into 17 million bottles of Bells every year, it would be released as a single malt.
Yeah.
As opposed to going into the flora and fauna range. And that's it.
Yeah.
How sad is that? Unless you try the special releases. So Cragganmore is one of those that suffers. They have a 12-year-old, which used to be in the old classic malts. My favourite Cragganmore is the Portwood finish. And on the nose, I was with Dave Broom in Brighton at a whiskey show, and we both nosed at the same time. And we both got, it was like a shisha, you know, shisha bars, or with the smell. We got like tobacco shisha, mild, both at the same time. And that was
That's an interesting tasting. Though.
And neither of us, I know from my end, I can't speak for Dave, that would be uncool, but I'd never had that as a tasting note ever before.
Right.
You know, normally you go dry spice, butterscotch, whatever, you know, your vocabulary, but out of nowhere. And that's, in fact, with Talisker, it reminds me of being 5 years old, clearing out the fireplace in the 1950s at home. Burnt embers.
Yeah.
I'm back home, right there. You know, 66 years later, but that's what I'm getting. So Cragganmore, of all the whiskies in the Diageo portfolio that go into blends, this is the most asked for. Cragganmore. Aromatic, balanced, beautifully balanced.
It's quite juicy on the palate, and then
I'm
almost
just
a little
about
bit
to dive
astringent.
into it now because, again, this is my effectively first time. I just had a little wee bit earlier in the week. There's a couple of special releases. I think there's a 29-year-old and a 20-year-old. Both of them fantastic. But we don't promote it.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, flat top stills, weird. You know, not up and down the line arm, up, straight across, down.
I remember, I can't remember whether it was possibly a 12-year-old special release. It was one of the first tastings I think I was ever at with you hosting, where you came up with the story that I think you said Cragganmore was the closest in distillate to Talisker, and they were having a problem with their water.
Correct. That was right. The water ran out on Skye. They said, we've got to make a Talisker-like whiskey at Cragganmore.
Cragganmore, yeah. Incredible.
It is extraordinary. It's a grower. It's a bit like the Colvermore, to be honest.
Yeah.
Not in taste, but in it just keeps. I found it.
yeah.
So when Emma did that for me, put this little contraption to be able to share it with like-minded people. I don't think it was in the special releases, or maybe it's a Prima and Ultima now. I'm not. I'll have to speak with somebody in that. But the fact that they've still got top shelf. A lot of top shelves are bare these days.
Yeah.
It's getting harder. You know, it just is getting harder, especially at a half-decent price.
Yeah. No,
So
definitely.
I probably won't be able to buy this, although I will try to find out. I did look under Prima and Ultima. I couldn't find this particular one.
Yeah. I mean, you know, remarkable again, because, you know, that kind of bygone era kind of notes to it, right?
And it takes water really well. there are times when I do require water. My palate has changed since I first started drinking whiskey. You know, now I like light, delicate whiskies, and I don't like anything over 50% in general, unless by accident it is more, but it doesn't taste it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I'll always taste it if it's at 55, 56 or whatever. But like some of the bimbers I try them and instantly go to water.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's me. And the younger generation, oh yeah, this is fantastic. They're growing up on that. So I appreciate it. So my values, you know, it's a generational thing. I totally understand that the younger generation drinking whiskies have not drunk what I've drunk over the years. So my palate has ended up where it's at because of what I've drunk.
Yeah. I think that's the thing, though. Like you say, your palate develops so much, and it's like Stevie, who's not far behind me on his whiskey journey, you know. But I was very much, when we first started working together, complaining about a lot of thin whiskies, and Stevie then was getting into whiskies, and then all of a sudden it was like he was on that same buzz, and now all of a sudden, you know, the last couple of years, I found joy in other bits, and I can see he's not far behind. So this is the thing. You're absolutely right. Your palate changes and develops over time, and sometimes you are looking for those super high strengths. I think more than anything for me, it's at the moment I'm happy to drink anything. I actually cracked open, I think you were taking the piss out of me there the other day, a Glenlivet 12, and I wasn't really expecting much from it.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it.
Wow.
And it just sits so well in the glass at that 40% for me. It's a whiskey I wouldn't think a huge amount about, but it's going down nicely. And 2 or 3 years ago, I probably would have given it absolutely no respect, not the time of day. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
open mind. I think you're developing an open mind. I think that, you know, you're tasting, well, now more whiskies than me. You know, I go back a few years. I'd be in the Royal Lochnagar warehouse, you know, with private clients, nosing and tasting and nosing and tasting and nosing and tasting.
For sure.
Non-stop. And, you know, then you find out, my God, there's people out there who aren't buying on taste, not even on investment, but being moved because it's from a certain... I remember being in Royal Lochnagar, and this gentleman was blown away by this Glenurry Royal, and he said, I want to buy that cask. And he was told quite politely that the only reason that cask is there is to show people what happens if you keep whiskey too long in a barrel.
Right. Gas.
And that's the last cask that they have. So there will be no more of Glenurry Royal, apart from the one that later this afternoon we'll be drinking, albeit in a blend. But
Amazing.
Do you see what I mean? This man, even though the whiskey was not good, and I've seen this at Lagavulin, a 1966 Lagavulin cask that was way past its best, somebody offering thousands and thousands of pounds for it because it was 1966, the year that England won the World Cup or something. Do you know what I mean?
The gas.
How mad is that?
I've just gone back to that Lefroy for the last little bit as I've rinsed out the glass. I've got this beautiful buttery popcorn note.
Right there.
Really, really like crazy.
If you leave Lefroy overnight, I like leaving all my glasses
it's a different beast.
overnight on the kitchen table and come out in the morning. Lefroy in the morning, you smell bourbon. You smell the cask.
Right.
Peter's said farewell.
Right.
It's quite incredible.
That's an interesting one. Colin, we'll move on to the next one. I know we're conscious of time here. So it's the Balcones, right?
The Balcones. So years and years and years ago, I met a guy called Chip Tate, and he was the wild and wacky guy who came up with the concept of Balcones, or Balcones, whichever way you want to pronounce it. And he quickly made a reputation, and he was a bit of an extrovert. And he also came up with this 3-year-old single malt.
So it is single malt, Texas single malt whiskey.
Texas.
52?
52.3, I think it is.
9, I think.
Oh, there you go.
Maybe 3, I don't know.
But just before, last week at a car boot sale, for 50 pence, I picked up this book. And this book was put together in 1947 and it's about a guy called John Steinbeck.
Name's familiar.
Yeah, of Mice and Men.
Right, that's what it is. Yeah.
And me being a little bit older than you guys, I am a big fan of John Steinbeck, and particularly some of the works that he's done, with the most famous one being The Grapes of Wrath,
Right.
about the Dust Bowl immigrants moving from Oklahoma to California to pick oranges because all their land had been blown away by the winds and their farms were foreclosed by the banks, and whole towns were wiped out, and they got into their jalopies or cars to go to pick oranges in California. And incredible story. It's still taught in all the American schools these days. Anyway, enough of that. But there is a little bit here that I found quite interesting. It's only a tiny bit. And it's really, I was toying with reading this out later in the blending session that I did, because blends have been around forever, just in different forms. Anyway, this is John Steinbeck from Cannery Row, written in 1945. And this is about a guy called Eddie, who was a down and out, and he lived in a flop house. You know what a flop house is? A down and out hostel, back in the middle 1940s. Anyway, Eddie. But Whitey liked to have Eddie take his place behind the bar because he was convinced, and correctly, that Eddie was one man who wouldn't try to steal anything. Almost everyone trusted Eddie to that extent. Eddie didn't have to remove much liquor. He kept a gallon jug under the bar, and in the mouth of the jug there was a funnel. Anything left in the glasses, Eddie poured into the funnel before he washed the glasses. If an argument or a song were going on at La Ida, the name of the bar, or late at night when good fellowship had reached its logical conclusion, Eddie would pour glasses half or 2/3 full into the funnel and take the jug back to all his mates in the flophouse. The resulting punch, which he took back to the flophouse, was always interesting and sometimes surprising. The mixture of rye, beer, bourbon, scotch, wine, rum, and gin was fairly constant. But now and then, some effete customer would order a stinger or an anisette or a curacao, and these little touches gave a distinct character to the punch. It was Eddie's habit also to shake a little Angostura into the jug before he left. On a good night, Eddie would take home 3/4 of a gallon, which he would share with his fellow alcoholics. And very briefly, on the next page, he goes, it's funny, last night, he said, there were 10 guys in here ordered Manhattans. Sometimes you'd maybe get 2 calls for a Manhattan in a month. It's the grenadine gives the stuff that taste. And he said, that's the difference. These alcoholics would analyze the blend as to what was in it. Isn't that great?
The art of blending.
Right there.
I love it.
The Art of Blending.
I love it.
1945. Johnny Steinbeck.
Very good.
So with this didn't move me as much as I hoped that it would when I first bought it. Hence it being sitting in my loft for a very, very long time. But it's one of the very few American whiskies I have that's got bottle age.
Right.
And bottle age has a massive effect.
Yep.
As I'm sure you know. You know, you buy these whiskies, these 5, 10, 12, 15-year-old whiskies that have been aged for 25, 30, 40 years of age. It's quite incredible how that oxidization causes a very strange flavor profile.
Yeah.
You know, like an old mushroom kind of note. I tend to get sometimes.
I'm surprised it's even up for debate, to be honest, because, you know, Serge and others are big proponents of kind of old bottle effect and bottle aging. But, you know, there are still some people out there who are like, whiskey does not age or change, you know, profile in the glass. Like, that's just bollocks.
Yeah. Yeah, rancio,
Yes.
I think is the word that's used.
100%.
And it's amazing when you come across it, you know. I had a Auchintosh in 1965. And I said to the distillery manager, how come this doesn't taste like any other Auchintosh I've ever tried? And he goes, that's the 65, isn't it? I said, yeah. He goes, oh, that's the year we made we used barrel yeast instead of packet yeast. Because I was having a debate with him about vintages. I said to him, I don't think there are vintages in whiskey. There are mistakes that make vintages.
Right.
And he said, so we use barrel-flavored barrel yeast for one season.
Yep.
And the new make would have been filled into these into the yeast barrels. So although there would be a minuscule, if anything, of a second malolactic fermentation, something in that would have created that 1965 Auchintosh to being what it is. And I've since, you know, in my head, not for now, but I've got about 20 whiskies that are mistakes.
Yeah.
Ardbeg 74, only year they used Australian barley. Only year. Won't find it in a book, but you will find it when you speak to the manager from that era.
Right.
So, here, please give me your opinions before I sample.
I think it's an interesting one. I think it's rancio is definitely, it's kind of quite rich, and I'm getting quite a lot of burnt sugar, but then I'm also getting quite a lot of freshly squeezed orange almost.
Yeah.
So if you didn't know
Citrus
what it
fruit.
was, would you say that was an American single malt?
Yeah. Well, I'd say it's American.
No, I'm interested.
I'd say it's American, definitely.
Definitely American.
Yeah.
It has that sort of maple syrup note is still there, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So
exactly.
you go, is it an odd bourbon?
Yeah, exactly. Is it an odd bourbon, or is it, exactly. I don't know. It doesn't taste like a rye, but there's something there. It's definitely American.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd go to single malt though.
Exactly. That was my opinion when I first tried it. I thought, it's a bourbon.
Yeah, right.
And it just got put in a box. And
Forgotten about, for sure.
But the fact was, up until that time, I'd only known one guy in America who brought out a whiskey called Old Potrero. You know it?
No.
Can't say I've ever
Old
heard of it.
Potrero. And the guy there brought out America's first single malt. And it was like 3 years of age, similar to this. But along came Chip Tate, who did all these experiments. If you get time or bored, either one, and you're interested, Chip Tate is a very interesting chap.
Okay.
All right? I'll leave it at that because time is tight, as Booker T and the MGs once said.
What do you reckon though?
It's really interesting. I think time in the bottle has significantly mellowed it over the couple of Balcones I've had before.
Yeah.
And it's at the point where it's almost mistakable for something other than American. Not quite yet. And it'd be interesting to, come back to it another 3, 4, 5 years time.
Yeah, it could well be around
right?
for a while. Do you want to try?
We have some more glasses. Sorry, dude. Trying not to interrupt the flow of conversation. Apologies.
We're on the last one.
But I find it's really interesting how you said...
Yeah, so I was going to say it right next to you.
How you said rancio, Jay, because that's not something I got on this, but it absolutely is something that I got on the Conformal.
Right, okay. Thank you, sire.
I personally...
Stevie featuring for the episode. There he is.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Look at our lovely glass mate.
Shirt on for it and everything.
You dressed up for us, mate.
Yeah. Stevie, I have a Lagavulin, please, mate.
Just a tiny drop. I had some of this at the festival. So this is the festival bottling
Oh, from this year.
from this year.
Oh, amazing.
10 years old. Obviously, refill American. which is the standard. But for a period of about a month, from my led to believe 4 weeks, they used a heavily peated malt. Normally, Lagavulin at 35 ppm.
Yeah.
This is up in the, from what I've been told, up in the 50s.
Oh, wow.
Like a malt mill, you might.
Did you say that then? You've learnt something new.
I think we're both going to be hanging on to that information for the rest of our lives there, right? Absolutely.
So Lagavulin is, I'm a big fan. 2 reasons. 1, the whiskey. 2, the name of the band that I'm in is called the Lagavulins. We've got a single coming out in a couple of weeks. How about that?
Oh, amazing. Bit of a plug. There we go.
It's called Whiskey is a Conversation.
I'll tell you what, by the time this goes out, that will probably be live. So we will link it in the description below. Is it going to be on YouTube?
Yep, it's going to be, I can get it. It'll be on YouTube. It'll be an MP3. It's going to go on to all the mediums that it should do.
Amazing.
The guitarist has played with people like Clapton and Marley and...
And what's your
They
role in the
carry
band,
it.
Colin?
Singing.
Front man. As if I needed
it's
to
called
ask.
Whiskey is a
Obviously, a front
Conversation.
man. All right, very good. Well, we're going to link that in the description
Anyway,
below, guys.
so
That's
here-
fucking phenomenal.
Lagavulin, right? Ain't no fooling with a Lagavulin. Quite simply, I get a biggest kick of this. This year, biggest thing, guy retired there called Pinky. You ever heard of him?
Yep.
Pinky, Ian MacArthur. Been with Lagavulin and Portellin 54 years. 54 years. 13 at Portellin, closed down, then at Lagavulin. Anyway, he retired October just passed. So I spoke to his friend on the island and said, what can I get him as a farewell present? Because I see him every year.
It's a great story.
Yep.
And
I know what you got him as well.
he said...
Oh, do you?
He said, well, he's got a farm, he's got a few cows. He's looking for an Aberdeen Angus black bull. Exactly.
What else?
Exactly. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I did a whiskey tasting in London and I raised the money to buy this bull. And I therefore went out and bought a fully inoculated Aberdeen Angus black bull, had it delivered off the ferry to the distillery and presented Smokey to Pinky on his last day. And we hugged for about a minute and the tears ran down his cheeks. And 2 weeks later, Diageo then held a bash for him in the distillery, and they asked me to come up and host it, and they brought out a single cask for him.
Amazing.
And
Rightfully so. 54
it won't happen
years.
again. And so last Sunday, 7 days ago, I was in his house with his wife and their daughter, and the bull cost $6,500. The night, the charity whiskey night raised $10,500. So with the extra money, next year, Pinky's coming to London as my guest.
Hey!
And staying in a 5-star hotel, and I'm going to show him, his wife, and his daughter London.
Amazing.
That was last Sunday.
Great crack. That's phenomenal. Good man
Lagavulin.
yourself, Colin.
And he was Mr. Lagavulin.
Yeah.
He deserves it.
Yeah.
You know, he kept that. He was the best marketing that distillery's ever had.
Yeah.
Every year I'd see him, and every year he'd pull out the stops and cut Pete with him and everything and tell me the stories. And I'd take the stories from Isla, put them all in a carrier bag in my head, bring it back to London, and then spread it out.
But this is the thing, and this is why I love speaking with you, Colin, and why we're so glad to have you on the podcast. And the industry needs more people like yourself, that kind of, that joiner between the big conglomerates like Diageo, and I know you're not working there sort of directly anymore, but you're still in conjunction with them a lot of the time, and the men and women on the ground who are making the whiskey, who are pouring their passion, their heart, their soul into these wonderful spirits on a day-to-day basis. And it's so important to share those stories. And I'm so interested in the different projects and different pieces that you're working on at the moment. And, you know, obviously we'll link the song in the description from Colin's band there, but there's an awful lot more coming from this man. You say you're 71. You've got a whole life ahead of you in whiskey. I'm really excited to see what you're doing now in this next chapter. It's wonderful talking to you and the passion that comes through. And the great thing about it, and for me, I feel kind of, I never have my own stories to tell. I'm sharing other people's stories. You've got some great stories of your own, but you're so passionate about sharing other people's stories.
Yeah.
And that's what I think the industry is all about. And that's why I love talking to you so much. It's really refreshing. It's great. It's really, really great. And this is delicious.
Yep.
With a real mixture here.
A real mixture. Absolutely.
See, on the nose, this takes me back to the Stillhouse.
Right.
It just, having spent 3 or 4 days there last week, I'm still there when I nose this.
I mean, it's undeniably a Lagavulin as well. It's just through and through.
Those three distilleries down there on the south coast, they're pretty exceptional. All of them, from Jackie Thompson at Ardbeg, and Lefroy's in different hands now. I think it's Beam Suntory.
Yep.
I don't know who the manager is there, but I personally believe that the staff, if I could make one change, I'd give more power to the people who work at the distilleries.
Right.
There's a great book came out a few years ago that I bought. It was just called Three. Not a internet service or anything provider. It was just called Three. And this woman in New York went around all the jazz clubs and she asked all the jazz people, give me 3 things you would change in the jazz world if you could. And I thought about it. I'd love to do that with whiskey. Just go around and ask 200, 300 people, if 3 things you could change, what would you do? Just to see where we're at.
For sure.
Yourself, all of us, because changes do have to be made and changes are being made and not always with the right end results.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit more conversation with the people who actually make it. You probably get a better understanding and plus ideas. It's no coincidence that one of the events this week on Isla or last week on Isla was all the managers together. Instant sellout.
For sure.
Because they got the stories.
Yeah.
They're living it. They're living the dream. The whiskey tourists are there for a week, and then they're back to their jobs in their cities or wherever. But these guys, I mean, they're probably looking forward to tomorrow when it's quiet again.
Back to the normal. They can go back living all of those stories once again.
Every year you've got to you've got to basically invent the wheel again. Ardbeg have done. I think Ardbeg Day yesterday was all about circuses. They had clowns, people on stilts. Every year they're coming up with something new to entice their followers. For sure. Now, the old purists will go, what do you want to do that for? Whereas the younger generation go, this is cool.
Yeah.
The influencers are going, this is great content. Anyway, that's my 6. My top 6. Top whiskies, great range. All of them have performed as well as I could hope to in a room like this. Not in a madding crowd.
Yeah.
But I shall probably have a pint of water before the show starts.
For sure. Listen, I don't think our normal wrap-up is needed. I think, the episode is top shelf tipples. Colin has shared some amazing stories with us, and thank you so much. I did bring a little contribution. I'll share that with you off camera. We don't need to do it now. But thank you so much for spending your time, for sharing your stories, but also for sharing these wonderful whiskies. It's really wonderful. I think a lot of people at home are going to be very grateful for the insights that you've given. I know I don't even need to ask you. Ian and myself are very grateful for the whiskies that you've shared and the time that you've taken. Obviously, guys, as we said at the beginning, we're here at the beginning of the Whisky Event. I can only encourage you to get to more whiskey shows, whether it be in London, up in Scotland, or the world over. And if you see that Colin's going to be attending and hosting a masterclass as he is today, buy yourself a ticket, because you're going to be able to try really special things. Sometimes they're well out of your price range and you'd never be able to try them elsewhere. Sometimes they're just unique oddities, whether it be single casks or little vintages, and Colin can really tell a story. He'll also pull your leg a little bit and probably have a bit of crack with you, which is always, it's what whiskey's about. Yeah. But thank you all for joining us at home. Colin, thank you so much for joining us on Uncut and Unfiltered. You are welcome anytime, sir. Welcome back again.
Fantastic.
But for now, that has been Uncut and Unfiltered. Top Shelf Tipples with Colin Dunn. We will see you next time. Slán se bheith. Amazing. Thank you, sir.